Well, let's say I got into the auto industry because the auto industry kind of found me, actually. I was a journalism major in college and was on the board of Sigma Delta Chi in Los Angeles. Met a fellow named R.T. Kingman, who was the General Motors public relations representative in LA. We developed a nice relationship between a student and a professional. And the more I was around him, the more fascinated I became about what he did and the company and the auto industry. I was not what I would consider a car nut, like so many people in the industry are. But I just found the industry fascinating. The scale of it, the diversity of it, the global aspect of it, the fact that almost everybody, regardless of what they did, had some level of interest in the auto industry. So I had an opportunity to go to work for General Motors right out of college, the week after I graduated. And that started what was a 43-year career in the automotive industry for me. Spent some time at GM, the first 13 years of my working life. And then I went to American Motors from there, on to Chrysler, through the merger with Daimler-Benz for Daimler Chrysler. Then I went back to GM after having been gone for 20 years, worked for another 5 years, retired, was asked to come back to GM another time, worked 3 more years, and then finally hung it up in October of 2009. Fascinating place. I would say that regardless of what your interests are, because of the scale and the diversity of the global auto industry, that activity, that interest level, those issues, those kinds of creativity are within the auto industry. It's so big, so diverse that I think regardless of what you're interested in doing, there's an opportunity not only back when I went in, but today even more so, because the complexities, the globalization, the speed, the needs of the industry are much bigger than they were even back in 1967 when I first joined the auto industry. Of course, a centerpiece of communications work within the auto industry surrounds the product. After all, at the end of the day, it's how many cars and trucks can we sell, so to return the kind of profitability and enable the company to invest where it needs to in technologies and new products. And a major move that I think still plays out very much to this day was really instituted by Tom Kovaleski, who worked with me at that time at Chrysler and American Motors before that. Tom was at Renault first, French automaker, and then he joined us at Chrysler, and then joined me at GM as well. And today Tom is the head of communications at BMW of North America. But the tradition within the auto industry at one time was to invite a big group of journalists that covered automobiles, invite them to your proving ground, and let them take a 30-second lap in the new car around the test track. And that was their exposure to the new car. And Tom's concept was to individualize it much more, to give them much more time in the driver's seat, to have much more of a personal, elongated experience. And so we went to very small groups of people, 15 to 25 at a time, and the program would run, sometimes a week or a week and a half to accommodate the same number that we would have traditionally gotten. And it totally changed the way vehicles were introduced in the U.S., and I give Tom all the credit. He definitely came up with this concept, which was used pretty extensively in Europe, which he was exposed to when he was connected with Renault. And that kind of intensive indoctrination into what the car was all about, where it was aimed, who the audience was, what the attributes were, and really allowing the journalist to get a very deep impression of a new vehicle early was a major change in the way that particular product was introduced to the media in the U.S. And to this day, I think that pretty much plays out. People have done things like even dropping cars in driveways of journalists and letting them just drive it in their home environment. So it continues to evolve, but very much the individualized experience. Now, some of our other efforts didn't always go quite as well. I remember 2 specifically. One where we had a long drive to get to the test track. This was when we were using a test track. This was on a vehicle called the Renault Fuego, which was a sports vehicle. And we were launching at the Riverside Raceway in California. And we decided to save time, we would cook breakfast on the bus going out there. and not realizing that cooking in an enclosed space and the smells that emanated from the cooking would cause some people to get sick, and we had people actually throwing up out the windows of the bus on the way there. The other one that sticks out in my mind, when we launched at American Motors the Jeep Grand Cherokee, one of the versions of the Jeep Grand Cherokee. This is the early versions. We decided we would encase it in ice in the wintertime and let it slowly reveal itself, and this would be the unveiling. And normally in Detroit in the winter, this would have been an easily doable idea, but we picked the winter where we had extremely high temperatures in the winter, got a late summer, a very late summer, and we couldn't keep ice on this vehicle. We had this poor guy trying to, attach these ice blocks and this ice to the vehicle, and it kept falling off the vehicle. And so that was one of the brilliant ideas that didn't quite pan out the way you might expect. But hey, it's all good. It got a lot of attention to the vehicle. The vehicle was very successful, and that's the bottom line in the end. Well, I think there's a couple of things to understand about the auto industry. Arthur Page came along at AT&T back around 1927. General Motors had its first vice president of communications in 1931. So it was of the same era. Ford was maybe 1 or 2 years after that. So the auto industry for a long time has recognized the value of communications internally and externally. When you read, Paul Garrett was the first vice president of communications at GM, and you read his list of ideas and thoughts about what communications should be, and I listed a number of those in the chapter in the book that Ray Day at Ford and I co-authored. Those things could be written today. It was about dealing with employees, not only deeds but words, describing what you're doing, but actually doing the things that people were looking for to respond to. That PR is everybody's responsibility, that it's a management function, that talking to employees is paramount in getting your message out. So there was a great deal of focus on communications. The other thing that I think really drove it, because there is this intense public interest in automobiles and the automobile industry and the design of them and the technology that's in them and the impact that they've had on America, there's been pretty high levels of scrutiny from a media standpoint of the auto industry. People that come to the auto industry from other industries are always blown away by the level of media interest in automobiles. It isn't so much true today, but there was a time when virtually every newspaper in America had a person who covered automobiles, who test drove them, who wrote about new ones, who wrote about the technologies and what was coming out of the auto industry. So there's always been this high level of interest, and that required an organization that could respond to that interest. And the other thing is the auto industry, because of the fact that it's in hundreds of communities and global, there's a lot of constituencies that the auto industry interacts with, whether it be the supplier community, the dealer community, the financial institutions, charitable organizations, political organizations, that sort of thing. And that required a good deal of communications, both internally and externally. So the industry, I think, is relatively sophisticated from a communication standpoint. It was a very early adopter. And of course, as you go through periods of time, you have CEOs and leadership that either pays a great deal of attention or maybe less so, and that seems to go up and down like it does in most organizations. But by and large, I think even if they don't enjoy it, CEOs in the auto industry understand that it is an obligation that they have to be a leader from a communication standpoint and have to engage in it and spend a good portion of their time. At GM, when I worked with Rick Wagner, he was incredible on internal communications. He spent an incredible amount of time talking to employees in small groups and big groups via video and later social media channels when we had that capability. Just felt that was extremely important, and went so far as to give the communication staff 100+ people, additional people, so we could have a communications professional in every GM facility in the U.S. and then encourage the international organization to duplicate that same kind of commitment to communicating to our employees. So it was a major thing, and even post-bankruptcy, a good deal of that structure remains today. Well, I think the process is good. You mentioned that your personal car is getting old. The fleet, the U.S. fleet, is the oldest it's ever been. Now, the other thing to remember is the quality of the vehicles being produced today are better, and people can run them much longer than they used to be able to run them. But eventually, people will have to replace these vehicles. So there is a big pent-up demand out there for vehicles. And while we're nowhere near the record highs of 16 to 17 million cars and trucks sold in the United States, we're hoping to get to about 13 million, and the auto industry, the domestic auto industry, can be very profitable at that level. The way, unfortunately, because of bankruptcy and restructuring at GM and Chrysler, and Ford fortunately was able to make it through, but basically did a lot of the same restructuring themselves. The industry can be profitable and healthy at a much lower sales level. And so if we ever get back, and most people believe we will eventually, to those traditional higher levels of 15, 16, 17 million units, the industry is going to be extremely robust. It's also, I think, a fascinating industry because it's such a core element of America. We kind of lost that story. That was one of the issues I think we had at GM and Chrysler and Ford, is that there was a time when people understood how much the auto industry contributed to America in jobs and taxes and charitable giving and community involvement, and like 1 in 7 jobs in America were related to the auto industry. And we stopped telling that story for whatever reason. And then when we got in trouble, one of the rules of crisis communications is you don't want to try and make new friends when you're in a crisis. And so we had a generation or two of people that really didn't understand what the auto industry had contributed and what it still was contributing to the U.S. So there weren't a lot of friends during the 2008 and 2009, and that made it very, very difficult. And it's a lesson hopefully the industry has learned, and they'll work harder on developing contacts, engaging people more in conversation about the industry going forward. But I'm very optimistic about the domestic industry and the auto industry in general. Will there continue to be consolidations? Probably, because there's too much worldwide capacity chasing a market that's not as big as the capacity indicates. And when countries, almost every country in the world wants an indigenous automotive industry. It's a sense of pride. It's a sense of economic power to have your own car company or companies. And so there's a lot of capacity out there, and that'll have to be dealt with over time. But it will. It has over time. Historically, it's been dealt with very slowly, which puts a lot of pressure on the car companies to incentivize their vehicles to sell them, which is not healthy. But I think over time the industry will remain robust. And the other thing that's driving it is there's a huge technological change going on in the industry. The electrification of the car, whether that's going to be with batteries or hybrids or fuel cells, it's all about electrifying the vehicle in the end, that the vehicle will run on electricity regardless of how it's generated. And that's going to bring huge changes. The new fuel economy rules will cause changes in the way cars are built, and the weight of cars, and the technology and the materials they use. So it's going to be a watch this space industry for quite some time to come, I think. I guess if I had some advice for somebody thinking about this is, you should think that the auto industry is for you regardless of what your background is. One of the things that I valued most in people that coming into automotive communications was the diversity of background. I mean, my attitude was, I want to find the smartest, sharpest, most creative people that are much stronger than I am, and create an environment for them to do their best work. And there is lots of room for that in the auto industry. And I thought it was very important to put together people that had communications background, that had financial backgrounds, that had an engineering background. And if they had the right attitude and wanted to learn how to communicate, we could teach them that part. But we really, really valued the fact that they had brought this diversity of thought and perspectives to what we were trying to do. And I think people, if they have an interest in the auto industry and an interest in communications, they should definitely go for it. It is a little difficult at times to break in, and they don't hire a lot of people immediately out of college. Usually they look for somewhere between 3 and 5 years experience, but a lot of agency support exists at the auto companies. It's an excellent way to get familiar with a car company, see the kinds of work that they're involved with, and a lot of people move from agencies into the auto companies to work directly at the auto companies over time. And I would say take a look at it. There's a lot of intern programs at all the major car companies. Almost all of them have intern programs. If you get the opportunity to apply for an internship, do that. They're paid. They're pretty interesting in that I know at least at GM we worked very hard to make them meaningful, that you really got to do something that you could take away and say, this was mine, this is what I developed. And so I would say, really keep the industry in mind. There's opportunity there, and it's got room for people of all different types, all different skills and interests.